Only by putting all of her weight onto it was Fluttershy able to snap the end of the mop handle. It was just the right size she needed. She gripped it tightly in her mouth, breathing heavily through her nose. Her mind was reeling, her body was fighting her decision, but it was one she'd already chosen to make. She carefully looked back in the mirror. Her body was starting to shake. She carefully raised up a hoof, her body screaming out as it touched the tender spot. She bit down harder on the stick. Her breathing was stirring into a panicked breath. The health drink had numbed some of the pain, but it couldn't numb this. She had one shot to do this right, and she had to watch to make sure she did it right. She couldn't close her eye. Her heart throbbed in her throat. She could hear every fast and deep breath she took, her hoof positioning itself just correctly. She readied herself as best she could, and then in a swift motion moved her hoof. Fluttershy screamed into the broom handle like she never screamed before. The pain was intense and instant, like red-hot knives piercing the back of her mind. Her body collapsed once more as the fresh tears poured out of her eyes. She panted heavily, laying there as she tried to recover from the pain. She lay there, twitching as her wings throbbed constantly now, in more pain than it had ever been before. She forced herself to stand up, to look in the mirror. She had to make sure she had snapped it back into place correctly. Through one eye, she looked at the wing carefully. Despite it being covered in blood and hurting like it never felt pain before, she could see that the wing was in the correct shape it should be. She'd managed to snap it back correctly. She prayed that it'd be enough to keep it usable once it had finished healing. She lay down onto her back and held her injured wing straight as best she could. Only having one hoof to mend it was a pain, but she could work around it. She carefully placed a stick on her wing to keep it straight, hoping it would also make sure her wing healed properly. She carefully grabbed the bandages and proceeded to wrap her wing with the stick. It was excruciating, but once her wing was wrapped, she'd finished taking care of her wounds. She panted heavily as she carefully picked herself up, looking back into the mirror to see everything that she had accomplished. Her face was half covered now, wrapped in bandages so only her good eye was visible. Her hoof was bandaged and now raised in a sling that had been carefully tied around her neck, just below her lantern so that both could fit around her neck. Her body had been rewrapped for the third time as well, to make sure the first wounds had received were healing well. And finally, her wing was wrapped in the makeshift cast that she had managed to get to lay flat against her body. She sighed at the state of her body was in. She had a hard time believing that this was real, yet there was no doubting the pain that she had felt. If Rainbow Dash and Pinkie Pie are hurt, could they take care of their wounds? Fluttershy frowned, looking at herself. Rainbow Dash is reckless, but she's also strong. She might be all right. She could fight back against the monsters here, but Pinkie Pie... She shook her head. No, Pinkie Pie's done this before. As hard as that is to believe, she'll be fine too. Both of my friends are fine. She smiled to herself in the mirror, trying to force herself to be reassured, but it wasn't working well. She frowned again before looking away from herself. I hope they are. She turned as she looked at her surroundings. She had wound up in a bathroom after the lift ride, though it seemed the effects of the drenched, rotting world had been left behind for the moment. The bathroom looked like it had fallen into disuse, but nowhere near the levels the hospital had. She had found a mop in the corner of the room, though it hadn't looked like it had been used in ages. It was time for her to leave, though. She had to go find her friends. She very carefully slipped the saddlebag onto her back and very carefully coordinating her 3 hooves, walked out the bathroom. She walked into a cool breeze, wincing a little as the cold air bit against her freshly bandaged wounds. She looked out as best she could to see where she was, but it seemed the night had fallen, shrouding the world in a veil of darkness. Has it really been half a day? Fluttershy asked herself in shock. She hadn't felt much time pass, but maybe because of her condition she was having difficulty with being a good judge of time. She carefully turned her lantern on and it illuminated the path before her. There was a dark road before her, open wide at first, before narrowing into a forest. She looked around, noticing the buildings that she had walked out of. She knew where she was. It was a boathouse that sat on the edge of Crystal Lake just outside of Ponyville. That means she was only a short walk away from there. She could be there in just a minute or two. "Hold on, Rainbow Dash, Pinkie Pie, I'm coming to find you," Fluttershy said, determined, before moving as quickly as she could down the path to Ponyville. She was having trouble coordinating her 3 hooves correctly, especially with trying to trot into town. She was wobbly on her legs, most likely a side effect from not having rested enough, but she kept going forward. Her determination was to see her friends, and it was the strongest factor driving her mind right now. Twigs in the forest snapped, strange noises crept through the leaves. She swore she could hear soft wails in the distant trees, but she forced herself to forget about the sounds. She had to move past them and move into Ponyville. The path began to open up before her, the dirt path quickly being replaced by the stone streets of Ponyville, the trees spreading apart as she saw the first signs of the homes in Ponyville. She smiled to herself as she returned, happy to be back in a place that seemed more normal than when she had been for the last half a day. Her music box began to hiss, stopping her in her tracks. "Oh no, they're here too!" Fluttershy gulped as she looked into the night, trying to see what was causing her music box to hiss. Sliding into view around the ground before her came a creature. It was in the basic shape of a pony. However, this creature seemed to be no older than a filly, reaching marehood. Its body was completely hairless, the skin of the creature looking as if it had been deeply bruised all over, and many parts of the skin dead or dying, with other parts seemed fresh and healthy in comparison. Its ears were folded down, melded with its face in such a way that its eyes were covered. Its long legs pushed its body against the ground. Its front hooves seemed to be strapped down on its back, as if tied down with its own skin, melding with its body also. As the creature crawled around, it let out a strange screeching cry, not unlike of the rusted metal grinding, unpleasant to the ears, but yet a sad wailing cry. Fluttershy gulped as the creature seemed to push itself all over the place, unable to move in a straight line. Her instinct was to feel sympathy for the creature, but her gut told her it was a creature to be pitied, and that it needed her help. Then an image of a dark creature appeared in her mind. She carefully stepped around, slowly getting away from the creature before running deeper into town. She slipped away from the creature, her music box finally going back to silence, as she panted softly, looking over her shoulder to the direction she had left the creature. It didn't seem to be able to follow her, which didn't surprise her, considering it didn't seem capable of moving in a straight line. She let out a soft sigh, grateful that she could avoid the creature. She really only had enough of the bandages left to wrap one more wound at best, and she didn't know when she would need it. She carefully began to look around, trying to focus on the buildings around her. She blinked her eyes to gain more focus. If she knew where she was in Ponyville, she could navigate her way around. She carefully moved her head around to look, careful not to harm her injuries, as a blur moved across her vision. "Huh?" she said, quickly turning her head back to the blur. In the distance, as if glowing white like an angel, was the image of a young filly. Fluttershy stared at the filly, not sure what to say or if to speak up. She wasn't even sure if it was real or not, but it was a filly just standing in the middle of nowhere. The filly let out a giggle before turning around and running away from Fluttershy. Hey, wait! It's dangerous out here!" Fluttershy cried out, her instincts acting to quickly chase after the filly. "Come back! You shouldn't be alone!" If the filly could hear Fluttershy, she didn't seem to be listening. She just continued to run, turning down a straight. Fluttershy followed as quickly as she could, but she was slow and stumbling now, as she cursed herself for having let herself get so injured when she needed her help to find an innocent foal right now. A music box began to hiss from the darkness as it crawled out another one of the monsters that pushed itself along the ground. Fluttershy ran past it, making sure to avoid even touching the creature. Her whole body was telling her that she had to catch up with this filly. The filly turned down another street, and Fluttershy followed as best she could, nearly toppling over as she slowed herself down with her 3 hooves. She quickly paced down the street when 2 of the monsters burst forth from the darkness, causing her music box to wail. These 2 seemed to be heading straight for her. With no time for her to move out of the way, she gulped before quickly jumping. The 2 creatures wriggled their way past her as she landed behind them. She thanked Celestia for having avoided them before running into sight of the filly. The filly made one last turn, but not down a street, but into a house. Fluttershy felt grateful that the filly had gone inside, but she still had to make sure she would be alright. Fluttershy quickly drew closer to the house, looking it over before gasping. The house was in terrible condition. It didn't look like it had been used in years. The windows were boarded, the walls were black, holes littered its frame, and the gentle breeze caused it to groan very slightly. Fluttershy gulped, getting a bad feeling from the house. However, the filly had gone inside of it, and she couldn't leave the poor thing alone. She carefully walked up to the door and pushed it open, her lantern illuminating the insides. The door opened into the decrepit living room. The furniture had long ago been eaten by insects, and the table lay in pieces on the ground. Most of the doors were sealed off with wooden planks, and the floor was covered in a thick layer of dust. Fluttershy slowly walked into the house. Her every footstep made the house creak and groan, as if struggling to hold up her weight. She looked around the living room. Every doorway on the floor was completely sealed. There would be no way for her to get through any of them. On top of that, she could see a single sign that the filly had entered the house. She turned her attention up the stairs. It's the only path that hadn't been barred off by wooden planks. If the filly had gone anywhere, she must have gone upstairs. Fluttershy slowly made her way to the staircase, looking up its length. She carefully began to climb it, testing each step to make sure it would hold her, as she then worked on climbing the stairs with just 3 hooves. She found herself doing surprisingly well. Despite the creaking, the moaning, and the constant threat of collapse, she made it to the top of the stairs. She looked around. Her left was a door that had been blocked off by more wooden panels, and to her right was... Fluttershy blinked in confusion. The imagery before her seemed to clash with the rest of the house. The section of the floor right before a door had turned into a red rusted metal, the door made of the same material. The wall seemed to be stretched out in a circle around the door, making the walls rotting and falling apart, or just behind the holes in the wall was a chain-link fence as still holding the walls together. The area gave her the sense that it was supposed to be like a cage. Fluttershy gulped before walking slowly to the door. She didn't know what was behind it, but something told her she had to look inside, that she had to find out what was in this room. She carefully put her hoof up to the door, taking a deep breath of courage, and pushed it open. The first sound that came to her ears was panting, loud, exasperated panting. Her eyes focused on the image before her, her sight recognizing 2 hues of pink in the shape of a pony. It had to be... Pinkie Pie? Fluttershy called out to her friend. The panting stopped as if the pink form seemed to freeze right in front of her. It slowly turned as Pinkie's wide blue eyes came into view, looking to stare at Fluttershy. Fluttershy let out an audible gasp as she instinctively took a step back. Pinkie Pie was covered in blood. Her mane was straight as her cheeks were wet with tears she had been crying. Fluttershy's eyes immediately tried to spot or identify a wound, but she didn't see one. The blood on Pinkie Pie hadn't come from her, it had come from... Fluttershy's eyes moved down to the ground. Laying on the ground in a pool of her own blood was Pinkie Pie. But this Pinkie was different. Her hair was curly like Pinkie's normally is, but it was wearing a multicoloured leather dress with varying wings on the back. Fluttershy? The standing Pinkie seemed to gasp, as if finding difficulty breathing. Pinkie Pie, what happened? Fluttershy asked in shocked disbelief. She could barely make out the scene before her. Why were there 2 Pinkie Pies, and why was one dead? Fluttershy! Pinkie hiccuped as fresh tears began to spill down her cheeks. Is that really you? Of course it is, Pinkie Pie. Why are you... Fluttershy couldn't finish the sentence. The words were refusing to come out, and she couldn't think of how to speak what she needed to say properly. Fluttershy, why are you... Pinkie choked on her words as she desperately rubbed her face with her tears. Why are you so hurt? Pinkie twisted her head as if saying those words struck pain into her. What? Fluttershy didn't ask confused. Before looking down at her hoof in the sling, she was hurt, but at that moment she didn't care about that. She cared about what was happening with her friend. I'm fine, Pinkie Pie, but please tell me, you're not fine! Pinkie interrupted with her yell. Fluttershy took another step back in shock. She'd never heard Pinkie yell like that before. Fluttershy! Pinkie visibly shook as more tears came from the pink pony as the blue eyes looked at her once more. Your face is swollen and covered in bandages. Your hoof is in a sling, your body is wrapped up, and your wing is in a cast. Pinkie then snapped her way ahead from looking at Fluttershy, and she sobbed hard. Fluttershy was speechless. It was true. She was in a very bad condition at the moment, but seeing her pink, party-loving, fun-having friend sob and cry while covered in blood didn't feel right to her. She wanted to help Pinkie Pie more than she wanted to help herself. Pinkie Pie, Fluttershy mumbled softly, as if trying to find the right words to comfort her friend. This is all my fault. Pinkie visibly shook as she cried. I shouldn't have let this happen. I should have protected you. I should have been there. Pinky hiccuped and gasped for breath. I should have known better than to let Twilight do this. Pinkie Pie, you couldn't have possibly known things would happen this way. Fluttershy offered her words to Pinkie Pie. Pinkie seemed to stop shaking for a moment before she began to shake again, though this time it was different. Pinkie was laughing. Fluttershy grimaced a little, as this wasn't a fun-loving laugh. This was the laugh of a mare whose mind was breaking. Oh, that's the laugh. Pinkie tried to smile, but her mouth wobbled as she rubbed her face. I've been through this before. I've done this once before, and I know how horrible this place really is. Pinkie shook her head. But despite that, despite knowing everything I do, I let's get brought here anyway. Pinkie let out a single laugh before her smile she was trying to have vanished from her face as she hung her head. Rainbow Dash was right, Pinkie mumbled quietly. If I had really cared, I would have said nothing. I would have told you everything that happens when you come here. I wouldn't have tried to hide the truth for the sake of protecting you from all what I experienced. No, I didn't speak up because I was selfish, because I only cared about myself, and so I let this hell fall upon you, Fluttershy. Fluttershy's mouth fell open as she tried to speak. She didn't honestly believe any of Pinkie Pie's words, but she couldn't help saying anything that would make her friend not believe them. Her mouth closed as she frowned. She felt so helpless. Pinkie's head slowly turned to look at the corpse of herself that still lay on the ground, but something about her body seemed to spark something inside of Pinkie Pie. But that doesn't mean I'm going to just let my friends die. She stood up, almost as if she was yelling at the dead Pinkie. I refuse to let this be the reason they die. So as long as I have strength in my body, I will not let any of my friends fall victim to this world any longer. So as long as I have a single breath in my air of my body, I will fight this world with everything I have so they can live. Pinkie was angry. She was panting heavily as she yelled at the corpse. In this one moment, she had never seen Pinkie go through so many emotions that gave Pinkie's words truth and behind everything she said. The words were all personal, words that she spoke from her heart. Pinkie slowly turned away from the corpse, looking at Fluttershy with a glare. Fluttershy flinched. Pinkie's stare softened when she saw the fear she was putting into her friend. Pinkie rubbed her face once more as she tried to put on a soft but sad smile. Come on, Fluttershy, let's get out of here, Pinkie said slowly, walking towards Fluttershy. Fluttershy could only just softly nod as she turned around and opened the door back up, walking back into the abandoned hallway, slowly followed by Pinkie Pie. So, what brings you here? Pinkie asked quietly, not looking directly at Fluttershy, but at the hallway before them. Well, Fluttershy tried not to stumble over her own words. I found my way back to Ponyville after getting separated, and then I saw a filly run into this house. I was looking for the filly when I found you, Fluttershy explained quickly. You saw a filly run in here? Pinkie asked, making sure she understood Fluttershy, and nodded her head. Did you find her yet? Fluttershy shook her head. Then we should try to find her. If there's one thing I've come to realize, things don't happen without a reason here, Pinkie said as she began to walk further down the hallway on the second floor. Fluttershy slowly followed after Pinkie Pie. There was silence between the two mares. Fluttershy wanted to speak up. She wanted to say something, but the words only got caught in her throat. She felt like Pinkie Pie was portraying herself as a monster. But she knew Pinkie Pie wasn't a monster. She was a caring friend with more than anything. She loved her friends. Pinkie checked the door, only to find it locked. She seemed to scrunch her face to the door before letting go and continuing leading the way. Fluttershy watched as Pinkie Pie moved. She seemed to scrutinize all the small details, looking at her surroundings with intensity. She looked like she didn't want to miss a single detail of anything in the house. She seemed determined, focused, like nothing was going to stop her from the mission she had set herself to accomplish. Fluttershy's ears perked up as her heart suddenly dropped. She could hear it. She could hear the siren blaring in the distance. Pinkie Pie, do you hear that? She asked, Fluttershy terrified of the sound. Hear what? Pinkie asked, instantly putting her focus on Fluttershy. You don't hear it? Fluttershy asked, surprised. Then maybe it's my imagination. Fluttershy, don't ever assume anything. Here is your imagination, Pinkie said, emphasizing the word ever. Tell me what you're hearing. I hear a siren, Fluttershy mumbled quietly. Pinkie's pupils shrunk, as if instinct. Fluttershy, stay very close to me. Don't leave my side, all right? Pinkie said very seriously. Fluttershy nodded with her head softly, as Pinkie turned back around before continuing down the hallway. At the end of it, they came to another door. Pinkie put her hoof up to it and the door swung open. Inside the room was a surprise. The shape of it was well taken care of. This was a new beige carpet with white walls, and all around the room was lit fairly well. On one side of the room was a gigantic mirror that seemed to encompass the whole wall. Pinkie entered the room first, scrutinizing it carefully. She didn't see anything out of the ordinary in the room, but there was a small bed in the corner and a desk with drawers. On one of the walls next to the window was another door, looking similar to a closet. Pinkie walked over to the desk and examined it, seeming to be looking for something, opening each of the drawers for a clue or an answer. Fluttershy slowly walked into the room as she had turned off her lantern. She had been expecting scenery similar to the kind she had seen at the hospital, everything drenched with water, rotting and falling apart, but the room was remarkably serene. Something about it gave her a sense of calm. Nothing, Pinkie Pie muttered, staring at the desk confused. Then she turned her attention to the closet door and walked over to it. She opened the door and saw a small walk-in closet that was lined with some clothes and boxes. She stepped inside to investigate for clues. Fluttershy sat down, looking at herself in the mirror. She really did look like a mess. She managed to avoid getting most of her hair in the bandages, so it was helping to hide the bandaged side of her face, but she still couldn't believe how much damage she had taken from the encounter at the hospital. "You'll be okay," Fluttershy said to herself, raising her hoof up to touch the mirror. The mirror began to become translucent as Fluttershy let out a shocked gasp. On the other side of the mirror, in a room similar to the one she was sat in, sat Rainbow Dash, staring at the mirror. "Rainbow Dash!" Fluttershy cried out, pressing her hoof harder against the mirror. "Rainbow Dash!" Pinkie cried out from inside the closet. She instantly moved to the exit when the door slammed shut on her face. She stared in shock at the door, and she tried to force it open, but it was locked tight. "No, no, you let me out right now!" Pinkie yelled as she began to bang on the door. She banged so hard that she could feel pain begin to soar through her hooves. Fluttershy couldn't believe that Rainbow Dash was on the other side of the mirror. She tried to bang her hoof against the mirror, but Rainbow Dash didn't seem to hear her. Rainbow Dash was just staring blankly back at her from the other side of the opposite mirror. "Rainbow Dash! Rainbow Dash! Rainbow Dash!" Fluttershy cried out, desperately trying to get her mare friend's attention, but she banged against the mirror as hard as she could, her hooves beginning to bruise with each strike. But Rainbow Dash just sat there, looking confused at the mirror before her. Suddenly, the lights dimmed. Fluttershy gasped as the light grew dimmer, her hooves quickly moving to her lantern to turn it on. The bright light blinded her as it reflected off the mirror, as she was no longer able to see through it, or Rainbow Dash with the light on. She quickly turned the light back off, looking back into Rainbow's room. The door at the back of Rainbow's room opened. The Rainbow still didn't move. Darkness was creeping into the room from the open door, washing it as if it was a mist. Fluttershy's heart sank. From the doorway fled a pair of familiar red eyes. Fluttershy began to bang on the mirror again and again, crying out as loud as she could, "Rainbow Dash! Rainbow Dash, behind you!" The dark creature opened its mouth, revealing its wretched white mouth as it slowly walked closer to the sitting Rainbow Dash. But Rainbow didn't move. She only seemed to tilt her head in confusion, looking at the mirror still. "No, stop, please! Don't hurt Rainbow!" Fluttershy begged as tears began to stream down her face, her hooves starting to hurt from how hard she was banging on the window. The dark creature stood right behind her, its white mouth grinning at her as her heart stopped beating, Fluttershy looking right up into its face. The dark creature opened its mouth in a bigger grin. Fluttershy's heart sank further into her gut. The dark creature raised its mouth higher, then it brought its mouth hard on top of Rainbow Dash. The mirror turned bright, forcing Fluttershy to shut her eyes from the sudden change. She adjusted her eye as best she could, then she looked up at the mirror. A soft, sad music lullaby began to play as images started to dance across the mirror. "Don't worry, Ashley. I'll fix you up." The image was a crying, very young filly, Fluttershy. Her ponytail had been torn to pieces, the stuffing spread all around her. The filly was very carefully pushing the stuffing back inside of her torn-up doll, before taking up the threaded needle and started to very slowly and very shakily sew the torn pieces back together. A splatter of blood topped the window, making the image turn red, before the images changed. "Mother?" Filly Fluttershy called out softly to her mother, who was lying in her bed. The older mare's head seemed to almost snap, as if looking in anger at the child. Fluttershy shook at the sight, never having seen her mother look so angry at her before, but the look of the older mare soon softened as she looked at her child. She was tired. "What is it, my child?" she asked, for exhaustion was her apparent in her voice. "Dad wanted me to see if you wanted anything to eat." Fluttershy whimpered softly. "Ha! Food to eat," her mother said with sarcastic bitterness, turning her head to look out the window in her room. "What's the point of eating? It burns my throat and makes me sick." But you need to eat, Mother," Fluttershy whimpered. "Oh, I do I?" The older mare glared angrily at her daughter. Another spatter of blood struck the window, causing the image to turn red once more before the images changed again. A smack rang loud as silly Fluttershy tumbled across from her sitting position on the table. Tears sprang to the edges of her eyes as she looked up at what she had just struck her. The nurse pony was glaring at her. "Now, tell me again. How did you break your wing?" She snapped at little Philly, who was crying. I... Fluttershy gulped as she tried to breathe. I fell while trying to fly." "That's right," the nurse said, walking over to Fluttershy and picking her up, sitting her back down. "You broke it trying to fly, you silly." The nurse said as if trying to be patronizing her. "You need to be much more careful when trying flying. It can be very dangerous to fly." The nurse nodded her head slowly. "Now, let's freshen that cast." Fluttershy could only cry more. The cast on her wings seemed to be digging into her skin. A third splatter of blood shook the window. The images turned dark. The mirror seemed to turn into a fire of darkness. The mirror burned up, completely disappearing without a trace. Fluttershy sat in darkness, tears streaming from her eye. She was sitting in the pitch-black room now, unable to see anything. She carefully moved her hoof up from the lantern, before hesitantly turning it on. The light lit up the room before her. Blood stained the carpet and the walls, but there was no sign of Rainbow Dash or the dark creature. The smell of blood and mildew stuck her next, as she could hear the dripping of water all around her. The room was now rotting, drenched, as she had returned to the world separate from Ponyville. She had returned to the other world. She had very slowly stood up, lifting her hooves over the wall where the mirror had used to exist. She carefully walked around the bloodstain that was covered all over the floor. She couldn't get a single remnant that told her Rainbow Dash had been there, only the bloodstains that scoured the room. She hiccuped before gulping, praying that Rainbow Dash hadn't just been killed before her eyes, but without a body there, she prayed that she could still be alive. Fluttershy walked up to the door in Rainbow's room and saw nothing, instead of something written on blood on the door. "Deep within, there are secrets laid to rest, but we cannot hide forever from the sins of our past. What once was lost will now be found. Bloodstained hooves will rise once more." Fluttershy couldn't help but realize the words that were meant for her. The images she had just seen were only the beginning. Once she stepped through that door, she was going to learn exactly what those images meant. With a deep breath and gulping down her heart beating in her throat, she opened the doors and walked inside.